Hi guys, it's Mark Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also Mark Zicree of Space Command, and I've also started a new channel called Mr. Politics, where I talk about politics. There's a link down there to subscribe to that. You can also subscribe to Mr. Sci-Fi, etc. And there's a Patreon page, and you can buy Space Command shares. Tons of opportunities for you to enjoy Mark Zicree in all his splendor. I wanted to talk today about one of the giants of science fiction who just passed away. And this was not only a giant of science fiction, not one of the well-known people generally, and also a friend of mine who actually worked on Space Command and whom I'd known since I was 16. Some of you will know his name, some of you will not. His name is Ron Cobb. And let me tell you my journey with him and his journey with all of us in science fiction. So here's where we'll start. When I was a kid, teenager, there used to be a great magazine on science fiction called Ciné Fantastique, and it would focus on science fiction films, science fiction television shows. It was very well written, very well done, and they had an article about a science fiction film that some guys at USC were making, and it was in development, and it took years for it finally to come out. But I was reading about it when I was like 15 years old, something like that, and it was a little film called Dark Star, and it was written and directed and starred Dan O'Bannon and John Carpenter. And John Carpenter directed it, Dan O'Bannon and John Carpenter wrote it, and Dan O'Bannon starred in it. And they mentioned this artist who Dan O'Bannon was friends with him, and he said, we need a design for this spaceship of ours. And this guy sat down right there in the restaurant, drew the design on a napkin and said, here you are. And that was the design of the ship Dark Star, which was really a good looking ship. And that was Ron Cobb. Now, at the same time, Ron Cobb was doing wonderful political cartoons in the Free Press. We're talking late 60s and early 70s. And he also created the ecology symbol, which was a circle with a line through it, and created it with no rights attached so that anyone could use it and promote it to help save the earth. And so Cobb would do these amazing political cartoons. Some of them were collected in books of his cartoons, and every now and then he'd have a really interesting alien in one of these cartoons, or a robot, or a spaceship, and they were really good and inventive, and his skill as an artist was phenomenal. And so I thought, gosh, I sure would like to meet that guy. And one time when I was 16, and I've talked about this before in Mr. Sci-Fi, but I wanted to tell some of these stories again and amplify, because Cobb was 83 and we just lost him, and he and his wife Robin Love were many years in Australia, and he was just a dear, dear soul as a human being, as well as a brilliant, brilliant artist and designer. And so I went to, there was a group of writers who left and editors who left the Free Press to start their own alternative newspaper, and Ron Cobb went with them. And there was a launch party, and somehow I was invited to it, and I was sitting at this kind of park bench with this picnic table, and to my right was a Hell's Angel with a knife this long, and he was pretty scary looking, but on my left there was this very pleasant looking bearded guy, and so I started talking to him. Turned out he was Ron Cobb, and I think he was a little surprised that I knew who he was, and but I was just thrilled to meet him. And I was about 16 years old, as I said, and at that time I was drawing and painting and sculpting and writing, and so he took me back that night to his place. I met Robin, who he was with at that time. I don't think they'd gotten married yet. And he started showing me artwork of his. And he had just completed 10 paintings, concept paintings, to help sell a friend's movie. And they were all lined up along the baseboard, these original oil paintings. And they were the 10 concept paintings. They were gorgeous. They were the 10 concept paintings that sold the movie Alien. The friend who commissioned him was Dan O'Bannon, and I believe he commissioned 10 paintings for a grand total of $1,000, which even then was like an astonishingly low amount for that amount of work. And so then Dan O'Bannon, Dark Star came out, and it was a success on the sort of the cult circuit. And by then, of course, Dan O'Bannon and John Carpenter both graduated from college, and both were starting to make names for themselves in film. And Dan O'Bannon was hired by Alejandro Jodorowsky, the great European director, to work on Dune as a special effects guy, a VFX guy. And he recommended they bring aboard Ron Cobb to do designs for the film. And then H.R. Giger was also hired, the great Swiss artist H.R. Giger. And so all of them were working together on this amazing film of Dune. Now, there's a great documentary that was been made of that project, which never got completed. And it's fascinating. I highly recommend it. But by then, Alien had sold, which was the project that Cobb had done the 10 paintings of. And Ridley Scott had come aboard to direct it. So Dan O'Bannon flew back to meet with Ridley Scott and start working on the film. And he said, hey, listen, I've got some artists who I think you should hire. One is Ron Cobb, and another is H.R. Giger. So Cobb started designing all the human stuff, the Nostromo, the interiors and exteriors of those. And Giger started working on the alien stuff, the alien ship, the alien creature, the facehugger. And then Cobb actually did some detailing on the facehugger to make it more interesting on the back side of it. And they were off and running. And Cobb was in amongst these amazing filmmakers. And very quickly his reputation spread. And when I first met him that first night, he told me that in the 1950s, he and a friend had tried to start a company to make science fiction props. And, creature suits, robots, all that stuff, spaceships. And because they thought that the design on a lot of science fiction movies in the 50s was very poor. And they were going to offer low-cost, high-quality stuff. And he told me about a robot suit that he had designed where you could never believe there was a human being inside, even though there was, because of the way it operated and looked very real. And surprisingly, no one hired them. And so they had to give it up. But of course, Cobb always longed to be a designer in movies. And so we're in like the mid-70s now, and and I'm continuing my friendship with Ron Cobb, and I'm in college by this time, and I do my first book while in college, which is 3 interviews on media and society, which you can buy as a Space Command perk. And I interviewed in that book Theodore Sturgeon, the great Theodore Sturgeon, science fiction and Star Trek writer, George Clayton Johnson, the great Twilight Zone and Star Trek writer and co-creator of Logan's Run, and Ron Cobb. And so I took photos of Cobb. I did a great interview with him, and by then he had started getting in with some filmmakers, George Lucas, Robert Zemeckis, and Steven Spielberg, etc. And amongst the things he did, well, first of all, around about that time, he was hired by Universal. Now, by the way, prior to that, he had done great covers for famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. His painting of Quasimodo was terrific. And so Universal Studios saw that worked, and they were opening up this new attraction called the Land of a Thousand Faces at their theme park, and they asked Cobb to design a poster for it, and it's, let me show you. This is, let's see if I can get a little back further. Yeah, this is the poster, which is pretty great. And then, but at the same time that Cobb was working on all of these projects, there was a director named John Milius, who was sort of a very macho guy, and he asked Cobb to do a painting of him of an alien landscape that would look like it was a photograph out of National Geographic. And so I knew Cobb when he was painting this. Okay? And look at that. Isn't that great? That's one of my favorite paintings of all time. It the original recently sold for, I think, $10,000, which, my gosh, if I weren't doing Space Command, I would have bought that painting. But I've got to use my money for Space Command. So, that painting of the guy on the giant lizard inspired George Lucas to create the dewbacks in Star Wars. And at the same time, there was this hammerhead alien in one of Cobb's political cartoons, and they used that in the Cantina sequence, and he did some other designs for aliens that were in the Cantina sequence, and now he was in the Slipstream. So Spielberg asked him to design the flying wing, the Nazi flying wing in Raiders of the Lost Ark, which he did spectacularly, of course. Now Alien came out. Ultimately, he would also design the dropship in the movie Aliens. He would design the DeLorean time machine in Back to the Future. He would design all the stuff in Conan, the Barbarian that Milius directed and Schwarzenegger starred in. and on and on and on and on and on. He designed The Last Starfighter, the visuals in that movie, and just was like one of the great unsung heroes of science fiction, where his work was just spectacular. The Defense Department hired him to come up with designs for non-lethal war, and that was fascinating to hear him talk about that. I remember going to his house before he moved to Australia, and there was the dropship, the model, the real model, on his TV that had been used in the movie. And Ron Cobb, but then Ron Cobb had ambitions of being a director. So because Spielberg called him and said, "I want you to do effects for me on my next movie," and designs. And Cobb said, "Well, I'm trying to find a movie to direct." And he said, and Spielberg said, "Listen, if you do the design work on my next film, I will produce a movie that you can direct." So fine, great, they agreed. So Cobb started writing. He got a hold of a script. And he was writing and designing this film about these malicious aliens who come to Earth and menace these people. And Rick Baker was working on it. He and Cobb were friends, and swimming in the same seas, basically. And as it developed, Spielberg more and more decided that he wanted to direct it. So he said to Ron Cobb, "Listen, if you agree to step down as director, I'll pay you $10,000 and you'll get 1% of my profits." Now that movie turned out to be E.T., and they were Spielberg's points, his profits, which were like gross profits off the top on merchandising, on everything related to E.T. So Cobb's first check off of the back end of E.T. was $400,000, and he continued to get checks like that for many, many years, probably until now. And so he was able to buy a house with that, and he never had to work again, but he continued working because he loved it. And so on Space Command, I'd wanted to work with Ron Cobb from the day I met him and before. And so I saw on his website an amazing illustration of a spacecraft that he had never used. And it was a wonderful drawing. And I said to him, I contacted he and Robin, and I said, "Can I use this for Space Command as the Shrikes, the two sort of Vipers, the fighters that are inside the Paladin that we see fleetingly in the first hour, but much more in the second." And they came back and said, "You bet, absolutely." And so Ron Cobb is credited on Space Command, which makes me very, very proud indeed. And so that's some of it. He was admired by VFX guys. He was admired by directors. He was admired by writers who knew how things work in film and TV. He was hugely admired by designers, admired by artists like Ian McCaig and Bill Stout. And again, anyone with any sense loved Ron Cobb. But more than that, and I also did a sketch of him, a portrait of him, which I'll post. And back then when I was a teenager, and I think really caught his his very special quality. And so as a person, he was this filled with humor, filled with joy. He had this kind of ironic sense of humor, and kind of like looking at all the nonsense that man got up to, all the cruelty and waste. And he was very much, sort of observing it and just kind of bemused by it, and yet was able still to find humor and of course love in his life. And in his later years, he had a son with Robin. I think she was the oldest woman in Australia to ever give birth to a child, to a baby, and so he's survived by his wife Robin and by their son, and what an amazing life. In the right place at the right time with the right talent. And I'm so glad I got to know him. I've been so blessed with these wonderful, wonderful geniuses that I've gotten to know. I'm so grateful, and to have him in Space Command was a joy. And so that's about it for now. There's lots more to come, but I really wanted to talk about my friend. And if you haven't checked out Ron Cobb, just go on Google and type in Ron Cobb, and you will see just like an endless parade of phenomenal drawings and paintings. And this was a guy who's like we will never see again. He was absolutely one of a kind. So that's about it for now. Feel free to reach out to me, and if you want to buy Space Command shares, it's markzakri@gmail.com. If you want to help us on Patreon, hugely appreciated. Every dollar helps. We're shooting more on Space Command on Sunday, COVID compliant, and we're just living the dream and bringing it to you. So that's about it for now, guys. Thanks so much, and we'll talk again really soon. Bye.